This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want to pre-order some Bloomburrow, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nadu, and in this video I'm continuing with my Bloomburrow Limited set review. So far I've looked at all the multicolored, colorless, and white cards, and today we're going to look at the blue ones. For each of these cards I'll discuss how I think they'll perform in Limited, that means draft and sealed, and I'll punctuate each evaluation with a letter grade. If you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what my letter grades mean, you can find a guide in the description for this video. There are a few important things to keep in mind as I review these cards. First, because we're only talking about draft and sealed, I'm only going to be talking about cards that can be found in play boosters. Furthermore, I'm only looking at cards from the main set in this video. Play boosters in this set do have special guests, but I'll look at them in another video. Second, these are my evaluations of these cards before playing with them, since the goal is to have the set review done in time for the pre-release. That means I'm not going to be right about everything, but as the format comes into focus, I'll be doing videos where I update my thoughts about the format. Lastly, I want to let you know that there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. You get access to my ongoing set notes during preview season, and you'll get a spreadsheet with all of my grades at the end of the set review. If those perks interest you, check out the description where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's dive in with a look at the blue cards in Bloomburrow. First up, we've got Azure Beastbinder, which for one generic and a blue is a 1/3 rat rogue. It's a rare, it's got vigilance, it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or greater, and when it attacks, up to one target artifact, creature, or planeswalker an opponent controls loses all abilities until your next turn. If it's a creature, it also has base power toughness 2/2 until your next turn. This is really good. It can't be blocked by anything that can actually kill it, and its attack trigger has so much upside to it. You can, of course, use it to make their one creature that could block it unable to block it, but beyond that, it can even make combat better for your other creatures, since you can turn some big scary thing into a 2/2 with no abilities, and don't forget it remains that way until your next turn, so it can really alter what your opponent can do on their turn as well. This 2-drop is an absolute beating, giving it a B+. Next up, it's Bellowing Crier, which for one generic and a blue is a 2/1 Frog Advisor at common. When it enters, you draw a card and then discard a card. A 2-mana 2/1 is a D these days at the very best. It just isn't a stat line you can afford to play if a card doesn't do something else significant. I think this does get there, as looting is especially good in blue-black, and it's also an enter the battlefield ability that can potentially be rebought in blue-green, so it's a solid card overall. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Calamitous Tide, which for 4 generic and 2 blue is an uncommon sorcery. Return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands, draw 2 cards, and discard a card. 6 mana to bounce a couple of creatures just isn't something I'm excited about, especially on a sorcery. We've seen it before, and it just isn't enough for such a big cost. You even go down a card. You do get tempo, and yeah, sometimes this is a card that helps you get through for lethal or something, but it's pretty bad in many situations. Tacking on the draw 2 discard 1 helps because now you're not just getting tempo, but it's still not great for the cost. There's just too many creatures these days with enter the battlefield abilities and the like. I just think it's a D+. Next up, it's Daring Wave Rider, which for 4 generic and 2 blue is a 4/4 Otter Wizard at uncommon. When it enters, you can cast an instant or sorcery card with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. This looks really good. 6 mana for a 4/4 plus the best removal spell in your graveyard, most likely, is pretty awesome. And this format even has a decent number of ways to blink the Wave Rider, and getting this ETB more than once will feel truly insane. The 4/4 body isn't nothing either. Sure, it's not efficient for 6, but it's a real body that you can very easily trade with. Overall, this is going to net you a really nice 2-for-1 most of the time, and that's definitely worth 6 mana, giving this a B. Next up, it's Dazzling Denial, which for 1 generic and a blue is a common instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 generic. If you control a bird, counter that spell unless its controller pays 4 generic instead. It's a worse mana link when you don't have a bird, and a better one when you do. You're more likely to have a bird late, at which point the upgrade is definitely more valuable, and overall, 2 mana counter spells have been fine lately, giving it a C. Next up, it's Dire Downdraft, which for 3 generic and a blue is a common instant. It costs 1 generic less to cast if it targets an attacking or tapped creature. Target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. This effect is quality removal for blue as usual. It always trades 1 for 1, and sometimes it'll cost just 3. This kind of card is always underrated because people see it as bad removal, since it doesn't permanently remove a creature, but you gotta remember it still trades 1 for 1 like most removal, and while yeah, your opponent's going to get the card back at some point, the same is true of a creature that goes to the graveyard these days too. giving it a C+. Next up, it's Dour Port Mage, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/3 frog wizard at rare. Whenever one or more other creatures you control leaves the battlefield without dying, draw a card, and you can pay 1 generic and a blue and tap it and return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. When you can draw a card with this, it's going to feel really great, and the good news is the Port Mage can trigger that all on its own by bouncing your stuff. Now, that's not always worthwhile, but when it is, it's really good, since you're likely rebuying an Enter the Battlefield ability, or getting some other value in addition to that card, giving this a B-. Next up, it's Eddie Merc Crab, which for 5 generic and 2 blue is a 5/5 elemental crab at uncommon. It's got flash, it costs 1 generic less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. It enters tapped if it's not your turn, and when it enters, you tap up to 2 target creatures. This looks really good, both in blue-red and blue-black. The former likes spells and the latter likes cards in the graveyard. We've seen Tolarian Terror and the like do well in the past, and while this costs more and is harder to cast, it also has flash and can tap stuff down when it enters. It's going to be a really nice play for those styles of decks, and I think they'll be prevalent enough that this doesn't really need a build-around grade, giving it a B-. Next up, it's Aluge, the Shoreless Sea, which for 1 generic and 3 blue is a star legendary elemental fish at Mythic Rare. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of islands you control. When it enters or attacks, put a flood counter on target land. It's an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. The first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs blue, or 1 generic, less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter on it. To get maximum value here, you're going to need a very blue deck. I mean, just to cast this thing consistently in limited, you'll need to be really, really blue. But if you can make this a 4-mana 3/3 that reduces the cost of your instants and sorceries and threatens to grow and make your spells even cheaper, that doesn't sound too bad, but it is asking a lot. You don't want this to have a bad stat line, but even in a limited deck with like 12 islands, it's going to be inefficient a lot of the time, and then you have to have the spells to take advantage. Sadly, I think this is going to be too hard to get going in limited because monocolor decks just aren't a thing. And he's going to be hard to cast, hard to make a decent size, and if he's not a decent size, attacking and actually getting some value out of the flood counter is pretty hard too. I think this is just a D. Next up, it's Finch Formation, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/2 Bird Scout at common. It has Offspring for 3 generic, and you can pay an additional 3 generic as you cast it, and if you do, you get a 1/1 token copy of it. It's got flying, and when it enters, target creature you control gains flying until end of turn. A 3-mana 2/2 flyer that gives something flying on ETB is probably about a C these days. Windrake just isn't as good, even with upside. It's nice that in the late game you get an extra body and 2 flyers, and of course blue-white is about flying in this set, and these triggers can also trigger Valiant, which you might have if you're in blue-red or blue-white. I'm giving this a C+. Next up, it's Gossip's Talent, which for 1 generic and a blue is an uncommon enchantment class. Whenever a creature you control enters, surveil 1, and then because it's a class, you can pay costs to level it up at sorcery speed. The first of these takes it to level 2 for 1 generic and a blue, and then whenever you attack, target attacking creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn. And then on level 3, which costs 3 generic and a blue to get to, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may exile it, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This looks pretty bad in limited. It does nothing on its own, and the stuff it does do is largely underwhelming. I mean, Surveil, Unblockable, and Blink are all things that are okay, but they are all conditional enough and expensive enough that I'm not really feeling this. I'm giving it a D. Next up, it's Into the Flood Maw, which is an uncommon instant. It says gift a tapped fish. That means you can promise an opponent a gift as you cast it. If you do, they create a tapped 1/1 blue fish creature token before its other effects. Return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If the gift was promised, instead return target non-land permanent opponent controls to its owner's hand. Unsummon is pretty solid, especially in a set with a spell deck and a blink deck. You probably won't be giving your opponent a gift with this all that often, but it's upside on an already playable card, and sometimes you will desperately need to bounce a non-land permanent for one reason or another, giving this a C. Next up, it's Kidnap, which for 2 generic and 2 blue is a rare enchantment aura with gift a card. That means your opponent gets to draw a card before the rest of the card resolves. It says enchant creature. When it enters, tap enchanted creature. If the gift wasn't promised, put 3 stun counters on it. You control enchanted creature. If you don't go the gift route, we're still talking about a removal spell that lets you steal your opponent's creature. Even if it is going to be stunned for a while, it might have some abilities that are useful. So it's still like a 4-mana removal spell with upside. And then if you do decide to give your opponent a card, which you're going to do in some situations, where stealing their creature and having access to it to attack and block in the immediate future is better. Like, when you can do that, it'll feel incredible. And chances are good that whatever you steal is worth a lot more than whatever card you give them. But overall, I think that makes this a bomb. I mean, just stealing your opponent's creature, even if you stun it, is great. And the times where you are willing to give your opponent a card when it's worth stealing like a huge bomb or something like that and actually gaining access to it right away, it's going to be worth it too. So yeah, I think this is a bomb. I'm giving it an A-. Next up, it's Kitsa Otterball Elite, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/3 legendary otter wizard at Mythic Rare. It's got Vigilance and Prowess. You can tap it to draw a card and then discard a card. And you can pay 2 generic and tap it and copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Activate only if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. So this is mostly a 2-mana 1/3 with Vigilance and Prowess that can tap to loot, and that is a great card. It can attack reasonably well on a lot of boards, especially when you have mana up and cards in hand. It can attack your opponent and still have the ability to loot whenever you need it to. The looting can set up Threshold. Obviously it likes spells, which the blue-red deck likes. The other ability will come up sometimes, but you do have to temper your expectations a little bit, because generally to get Kitsa's power to 3, you're going to have needed to cast 2 non-creature spells, and the chances that you still have 2 generic mana left over to do this when you cast the second one, which you would be able to do this while that spell, the second spell's on the stack, because Kitsa will become 3 power before the spell resolves, but you're just not going to be able to do it that often. Obviously, when you can copy spells with it, Kitsa will feel really, really insane. But I think even without that second activated ability, this is a really, really good card that you always play and that you're excited to have in your deck. So I think adding that ability to the mix is enough to make it a B+. Next up, it's Night Fisher, which for 3 generic and 2 blue is a 4/5 bird knight at uncommon. It's got flying, and whenever another non-token bird you control enters, you create a 1/1 blue fish creature token. This stat line is pretty solid, and pumping out fish tokens when you play birds is a very real payoff, and you'll have plenty of birds in blue. Giving this a B. Next up, it's Light Shell Duo, which for 3 generic and a blue is a 3/4 rat otter at common. It's got prowess, and when it enters, you surveil 2. So all of these duos are sort of signpost commons where they have 2 creature types and then support what each of those creature types archetypes are. In this case, you have a card that supports the rat stuff, which involves getting Threshold, and Surveil can help you do it. And the otter thing is spells, and so you have prowess on this card. I think a 4-mana 3/4 with just one of these abilities is probably like a C. So having both and fitting into 2 different archetypes really well, I think is enough to make it a C+. Next up, it's Long River Lurker, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/3 frog scout at uncommon. It's got ward for 1, and other frogs you control have ward 1. And when it enters, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever that creature deals combat damage this turn, you may exile it. If you do, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This ETB is obviously going to generally allow you to send a creature in to do damage. Now, you can't always do it, like if you're behind and you need to leave creatures back to block, the ETB can be pretty much useless. And I'd say that's going to happen a significant chunk of the time, but there are also going to be times where this gives you lethal out of nowhere. There are going to be times where it lets you rebind into the battlefield ability. And the baseline that you have here is a 3-mana 2/3 that's a little harder to kill than normal. So I think it's a pretty good card overall. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Long River's Pool, which for 2 blue is an uncommon instant with gift a card. Counter target creature spell. If the gift was promised, instead, counter target spell. Double blue is a pretty big downside on a counter spell. That's because it's already kind of hard to leave up mana for counter magic in limited, so making it more mana intensive makes it even harder to do it. That said, if you give your opponent the gift, this is basically counter spell, although it 2-for-1s you. The rest of the time, it's a harder to cast Remove Soul, and you'll really only give the gift when you have no choice, because you have to counter something or lose, because 2-for-1ing yourself generally isn't a good idea. I'm giving this a C. Next up, it's Mind Spiral, which for 4 generic and a blue is a common sorcery. It says gift a tapped fish. Target player draws 3 cards. If the gift was promised, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. 5 mana to draw 3 on a sorcery is pretty clunky, but it is the kind of thing that can let you pull way ahead should you be able to make up for the major tempo loss of spending 5 on nothing that impacts the board. The gift situation here helps make that happen though, because you can stun the opponent's best creature, which is going to be worth giving them a fish a decent chunk of the time. You'll also choose that mode if it lets you get in for a big hit, which is a different kind of way to make sure you'll have time to take advantage of the cards you drew. Still, you don't really have room for more than one of this type of effect in your deck, and it's probably not a necessity. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Mind Whisker, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 3/2 rat wizard and uncommon. At the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1, and it has Threshold, which means as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, something good happens. In this case, creatures your opponents control get -1, -0. A 3-mana 3/2 that surveils 1 every upkeep is probably a C. That's nice card selection, and it helps you load the graveyard in a format where that matters. And if you haven't played with an effect like this Threshold ability before, I think it's going to surprise you. Giving -1, -0 to your opponent's entire board is hugely impactful. It alters combat on your favor, whether you're the attacker or the blocker, in a pretty significant way, giving this a C+. Next up, it's Mockingbird, which for X and a blue is a 1/1 bird bard at rare. It's got flying, and you can have it enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than or equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Mockingbird, except it's a bird in addition to its other types, and it has flying. This is strong. Clones that can copy something on either side of the board are great, and it's nice that you can pay different amounts of mana to clone cheaper things. At the same time, it is kind of a downside that to clone something big, you have to sink a bunch of mana into it, but it's pretty good. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Night Whirl Hermit, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 1/4 rat rogue at common with vigilance, and it has Threshold. It gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. A 3-mana 1/4 with vigilance is probably a D. It's just not an impactful enough creature these days. But a 3-mana unblockable 2/4 with vigilance is pretty good. That would probably be like a B-. This is because it simultaneously pressures your opponent and provides a solid defensive body. In the early game, this is likely to be that D-level card, and then in the late game, it'll be pretty formidable. Overall, that probably makes it a C. Next up, it's Otterball Antics, which for 1 generic and a blue is an uncommon sorcery. It creates a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. If this spell was cast from anywhere other than your hand, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, and it has flashback for 3 generic and a blue. So in the end, you spend 6 mana for a 1/1 and a 2/2 with prowess. You do it in installments, but either way, that's not great. However, the blue-red deck is very much into spells, so casting spells that make tokens that like spells is extra synergistic. Furthermore, milling this in a blue-black deck isn't too shabby either. So yeah, the rate's not great, but it has some nice synergy in a couple of different decks, and it's not that far from being a 2-for-1, but it is kind of clunky, giving it a C. Next up, it's Pearl of Wisdom, which for 2 generic and a blue is a common sorcery. It costs 1 generic less to cast if you control an otter. Draw 2 cards. Divination is kind of a passable card in most formats these days, like a D+ level card. Not adding to the board is rough, but it gives you a 2-for-1, and that can make up for it unless a format is really, really fast. Still, you probably don't play this unless you can cast it for 2 reasonably often, which means in the blue-red deck. The good news is there are enough otters that other blue decks in the format probably can play this card too. Like if you have 4 otters in your deck, you can probably play Pearl of Wisdom, but I just think it's a C overall. Next up, it's Plume Creed Escort, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 2/1 bird scouted uncommon with flash and flying, and when it enters, target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. This is nice. A 2-mana 2/1 flash flyer is already like a C, a card that will virtually always make the cut, especially in a format that has payoffs for having birds and payoffs for having flyers. And then this has the huge upside of blanking a removal spell, and when you can do that, it will feel like an absolute beating because you get a 2-for-1 and add to the board while doing it. It's not always going to do that though. Sometimes you're just going to have to run it out there as a 2-mana 2/1 flash flyer, and like I said, that's like a great fail case. But you shouldn't expect this to always perform as a card that like counters a removal spell and adds a body to the board. Either way, it's a great card overall, giving it a B. Next up, it's Portent of Calamity, which for X and a blue is a rare sorcery. Reveal the top X cards of your library. For each card type, you may exile a card of that type from among them, put the rest into your graveyard. You may cast a spell from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost if you exiled 4 or more cards this way, then put the rest of the exiled cards into your hand. So, you only get a free spell if you manage to exile 4 cards with different types, and that is very, very, very far from automatic and limited. First, you have to at least spend 4 on X. Second, you would need all 4 of those to be different types. So realistically in limited, you probably need to dump 6 or 7 mana into X before that part of the card is on the table at all. The good news is, that's a pretty sweet late game play. The bad news is, casting this earlier is awful. I mean, you can only put cards that you exile into your hand, so you're still having to mess with card types to maximize how many cards you get, and that's just not easy to do. Like, you're not even going to get divination out of this a lot of the time if you put 2 mana into X, and that's a problem. I think this is a D. Next up, it's Run Away Together, which for 1 generic and a blue is a common instant. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players. Return those creatures to their owner's hand. I didn't think this was going to be very good in Throne of Eldraine, but it ended up being pretty nice. There end up being enough situations where you can benefit from bouncing your own thing or your opponent's that this ends up being a card worth playing in lots of blue decks. And when you can benefit from both, it feels really good. And I think in this format, it will perform pretty well too, especially because returning creatures to your hand is like the blue-green theme, and it's just an okay spell to begin with, giving it a C. Next up, it's Season of Weaving, which for 4 generic and 2 blue is a mythic rare sorcery, and you choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes. You may choose the same mode more than once. So for 1 paw print, you can draw a card. For 2 paw prints, you can choose an artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of it, and for 3 paw prints, you can return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. This looks great. Most frequently, you'll probably make 2 copies of your best creature or artifact and draw a card, and that's a ton of value for 6 mana. But you can also make a token copy of your best thing and then bounce all the non-token non-land permanents, which will sometimes feel like a one-sided wrath. You do need to remember your opponent is likely to have a lot of their own tokens. There's a token mechanic in this set. There's a token deck in this set. There's going to be a lot of tokens. So it's not always going to bounce everything, but chances are good that you come out ahead because you can make a token copy of any of your creatures, which is likely to be better than their random offspring or whatever. It's that second mode that is what really seals the deal on the card overall, since it actually lets you add something significant to the board. You don't have to wait to cash in the value you get out of this card, and it can give you a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 really, really easily. And then it has this, again, like Cyclonic Rift-esque upside that is also really valuable when you need it. You probably only choose that last mode if you're significantly behind your opponent or your board has a bunch of tokens on it already and your opponent's has none. Whereas you're going to choose the make a couple of token copies of things and draw a card mode, like if you're at parity or you're already ahead and it'll just seal the game for you. All of that means this is really good no matter what's going on in the game, and it's going to win a lot of games when you cast it, and obviously that makes it a bomb, giving it an A. Next up, it's Shore Up, which for 1 blue mana is a common instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn, untap it. This was a really nice trick when we last saw it. It just does a ton for 1. It helps a creature win combat and allows it to blink removal and get some pseudo-vigilance going. This format also has a spell deck, so 1 mana spells have some extra value. This will just end up being the premier trick for blue decks interested in being more aggressive, giving it a C+. Next up, it's Shoreline Looter, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/1 rat rogue and uncommon. It can't be blocked. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card, but it also has Threshold. Then you discard a card unless 7 or more cards are in your graveyard. So this can chip in all game long while giving you nice card selection, and it helps you set up Threshold in the process, and then it's obviously a payoff for Threshold too. I don't love that it's a 2 mana 1/1, that's just a really bad stat line because your opponent can frequently pay half the mana to kill it, or kill it with an incidental enter the battlefield ability or some other ping effect that is basically free, but I do love everything else about the card. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Sky Skipper Duo, which for 4 generic and a blue is a 3/3 bird frog at common. It's got flying. When it enters, you exile up to 1 other target creature you control, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next in step. So another one of these duos. This one is supposed to support the bird deck by virtue of being a bird and having flying, and it's supposed to support the frog deck by letting you blink a creature. So this ETB isn't the greatest in most formats, but this format has a ton of support for blink effects, especially in blue-green. Like most of the cards in the duo cycle, it's nice for both decks it's meant to go into, but certainly not a card that it's important for you to pick up either. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Spellgyre, which for 2 generic and 2 blue is an uncommon instant. Choose 1, counter target spell, or surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. 4 mana for a counter spell is pretty much an F. Problem being, it's hard to leave up 4 mana. If your opponent plays around it, it's rough. There's a good chance your opponent spends less mana than you do. There's just a lot wrong with a 4 mana counterspell. You just can't play it in limited unless it does something else. And 4 mana for Surveil 2 plus Draw 2 is probably like a C-. So you're really overpaying for both of these, especially for the counterspell. But putting both on 1 card makes it a lot better, as if you have the mana up and can counter something worth countering, it feels fine. And if you don't, you get a pretty solid card draw spell that can dig you 4 cards deep while loading the graveyard with up to 3 cards too, so it's probably a C overall. Next up, it's Splash Slasher, which for 3 generic and a blue is a 3/3 frog wizard and uncommon. It has offspring for 1 generic and a blue. When it enters, you tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. 4 mana for a 3/3 that stuns something is solid, though not amazing. But if you pay 6, you stun 2 things and also get a 1/1. It's also really nice that this style of card just gets more powerful in the late game while also being fine early. It's also got an enter the battlefield ability that it's going to be nice to abuse in the frog decks. I'm giving this a B-. Next up, it's Splash Portal, which for 1 blue is an uncommon sorcery. Exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If that creature is a bird, frog, otter, or rat, draw a card. If you can use this to draw a card and you have a creature that has an enter the battlefield ability, it's going to feel really good, but you do have to be careful. Your opponent can respond and kill the thing you target, so you have to be aware when they can interact and blow you out. That's a pretty big problem, and while I'm willing to pay the cost for like a 1 mana fight or bite spell, that's because the floor on that kind of card is that it's nice removal. The floor here is that it does nothing but cantrip, so that concerns me. But you do pay very little mana for an effect that will sometimes feel like a legit 2-for-1, and this format has support for this kind of thing, giving it a C. Next up, it's Storm Chaser's Talent, which is 1 blue mana for an enchantment class at rare. When it enters, you make a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. You can take it to level 2 for 3 generic and a blue, and when you do, you return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. And you can take it to level 3 for 5 generic and a blue, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. This looks pretty good. It gives you something real up front, and does it pretty efficiently, like 1 mana for a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token, plus future upside on Storm Chaser's Talent is a pretty good deal. And while you aren't likely to get the additional value out of this card until much later in the game, what you do eventually get is pretty nice. Ultimately, this can easily generate a 2-for-1, and sometimes more than that if you really have time to go off at level 3. It's a little slow apart from the first part, but I like it overall. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Sugarcoat, which for 2 generic and a blue is an uncommon enchantment aura with flash. It says enchant creature or food. Enchanted permanent is a colorless food artifact with pay 2 generic, tap it, sack it, you gain 3, and loses all other card types and abilities. Ah yes, the blue enchantment that removes a creature but also gives your opponent something of value. A food is a lot less good than giving them a creature in most cases, although if you're playing a black-green deck, that food can get them some additional value, and if you're playing against black-white, the life they can gain from the food might give them some additional value, but still, it's better than giving them a creature. And the fact this has flash means some pretty wacky stuff can happen, like you can blank a combat trick or a fight spell. If you do that, this will feel pretty good, but just turning some medium creature into a food for 3 mana, which is going to be like the average use of the card, is not going to feel like you're getting great value most of the time. After all, you don't really get a full card of value when you do it, since you turn their creature into something that can still do something good for them. It definitely feels better when you're dealing with a bomb, obviously, but I think it's just a C+. Next up, it's Thought Shucker, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/3 rat rogue at common. It has Threshold, 1 generic and a blue. Put a +1/+1 counter on Thought Shucker and draw a card. Activate only if 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, and only once. Importantly, this says only once, period. Not only once per turn like we usually see. It would be pretty insane if you could just pay 2 every turn for this effect, even if you had to set up Threshold. Like, this would be an amazing card. But that's not quite what it is. But it is effectively a 4 mana 2/4 that draws you a card in the late game, and that's pretty good. And you can send it out early when you need to block or trade or whatever. I'm giving this a C. Next up, it's Thundertrap Trainer, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/2 otter wizard at rare. It's got offspring for 4 generic. When it enters, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. A 2 mana 1/2 that draws you a card is a great rate, so the fact you can play this late and draw 2 cards is amazing. Now, in order to actually draw said card, you need a spell-heavy deck, but blue decks in this format, and especially blue-red, are going to be able to hit 1 card with this ETB most of the time. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Valley Floodcaller, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/2 otter wizard at rare. It's got flash, and you can cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, untap them. A 3 mana 2/2 with flash isn't good, but this has so much upside. Giving your non-creature spells flash doesn't have the most upside, but if you're blue, you're likely to have lots of creatures with these types, and if you're blue-red especially, you're likely to have lots of non-creature spells. And turning your sorceries into instant speed things, especially in a blue-red deck, is really good. It also makes this trigger better because you can trigger it at any time, or at least you're more likely to be able to. You already can if you're going to cast an instant or a card with flash, obviously. And the untap clause is relevant too, as your opponent can never really be sure if they can attack you when you have mana up and cards in hand, giving this a B. Next up, it's Waterspout Warden, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 3/2 frog soldier at common. When it attacks, if another creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, Waterspout Warden gains flying until end of turn. So this will have flying a lot of the time between casting creatures normally and blinking them in the blue-green deck. And 3 mana for a 3/2 flyer is still a really good rate and limited, and that's what it's going to feel like a lot of the time, giving it a C+. And our last card is Wishing Well, which for 3 generic and a blue is a rare artifact. You can tap it, put a coin counter on Wishing Well. When you do, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value equal to the number of coin counters on Wishing Well from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only as a sorcery. Yeah, no. This card's not here for limited at all. I mean, if you can have your graveyard perfectly loaded so that you get a spell each time you tap it, it'll feel amazing, but you're just not doing that in limited. Even in the most synergistic deck around. You'll pay 4 for this, and it's unlikely to do anything for a couple of turns, and you just can't do that. I think it's an F. So those are all the blue cards in Bloomburrow. I'll be back next time to look at all the black ones. If you want to see the set review videos that are already out, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. If you want to see future set review videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to gain access to a spreadsheet with all of my grades on it, as well as my notes during preview season for this and upcoming Magic sets, you can do so by becoming a channel member or a patron. You can find ways to do those things in the description. Thanks for watching.